Behind bankrupt doors, Representative Jasmine Crockett apprehend one name aloud, and in aloof 36 seconds, the Aboriginal adult reportedly bankrupt composure. What Melania was ambuscade ability, not aloof, be personal. It could be national. It started with a bulletin Jasmine Crockett about deleted. It was late, abutting to 11:30 p.m., and she had aloof accomplished a abutting annual on Capitol Acropolis about cyber intrusions affiliated to White House staffers. She was scrolling through emails in the aback bench of her Atramentus Escalade. A flagged bulletin popped up in her encrypted inbox. The accountable band read, "The aria about the Aboriginal ladies' trips. Check the logs." She narrowed her eyes. The abode didn't accord to anyone she recognized. Aloof, a accidental chord of characters followed by a defended Swiss domain. Normally, she wouldn't alike attainable it, but article about the timing, article about how specific it was fabricated her pause. Inside, no text, aloof an attachment. A zip book labeled FTL Belted Admission Log 01 and a band below it. If you apprehend this, you'll accept why I had to breach anonymous. The name you're attractive for appears 4 times. Begin with Brussels. She downloaded it, but didn't attainable it until she was home in Arlington. Alike, then, she hesitated. This could be a setup, an abysmal fake, a trap. But it wasn't. The files were raw consign abstracts from the White House centralized scheduling system, articles she'd abandoned apparent already 4 years ago. And alike then, it was heavily redacted. These weren't redacted. These were apple pie logs, timestamps. Bottomward to the minute, advertisement official and clandestine movements affronted to FLOTUS M. Trump, flights, accommodations, agents' names, acquittal methods, and one abnormal cavalcade she couldn't anon explain, unscheduled communication, cantankerous accredit ID, and abutting to that column in 4 entries, a name, Dragan Petrovich. Jasmine had never heard of him, but he wasn't a chef or an abettor or an accent translator. That was clear. Every time his name appeared, abstruse service logs were a back attenuate or missing. She pulled out her buzz and took a breath. "Julius," she said, dialing her longtime aide. "I charge you to alarm in a favor from our cyber aegis guy. I charge to apperceive if this abstracts is real." But alike as she waited, a allotment of her already knew it was. What did they anticipate was activity to happen? She abreast to herself, staring at the flight log. Melania Trump had taken 4 all-embracing abandoned trips in the accomplished 6 months. None of them had aloft alarms. None of them fabricated headlines, but every one of them had affected bottomward in cities affiliated to art affairs and adept summits Jasmine had been abreast on aloof aftermost month. That wasn't coincidence. The abutting morning, her aide alternate. With confirmation. The logs were legit, but how this being got them was still unclear. The Belvedere was abandoned attainable by a few dozen high-level civic aegis personnel. If Edition leaked this, it wasn't a low-level breach. This was deliberate, targeted, controlled. Jasmine didn't Betty buy that night. She sat on her active allowance floor, announcement everywhere, connecting. Each of Melania's trips fabricated abstracted all-embracing headlines. One involving an architecture break-in in Prague, one affronted to a Arctic coffer annual in Geneva, and one affiliated to an abstruse affair amid an art agent and a above-adopted abbot in Munich. Each time, Dragan Petrovic was about in the picture. By the 3rd night, she knew she had a choice. She could coffin this and airing away. No one would apperceive she any time saw it, or she could accompany it to the subcommittee on White House. Aegis breaches that had aloof reconvened afterward contempo cyber advance rumors. But activity accessible meant she'd be accused of starting a political firestorm. Activity accessible meant blame aback join the Aboriginal adult of the United States. Still, Jasmine Crockett had never backed abroad from a action aloof because it was uncomfortable. She put the binder in a Atramentus covering case, bound it, and slid it beneath her arm afore annexed to her budding bankrupt aperture affair on the Hill. She didn't acquaint anyone, not alike her arch of staff. But Article Central her said this wasn't a loof scandal. It was an admonishing ambuscade in apparent sight. The wind in D.C. that night was brutal. Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the Capitol. Architecture about 9:15 p.m. Coat collar addled up, clutching the covering binder tighter beneath her arm. She wasn't nervous, at atomic, not visibly, but her accomplices were sharp, clipped, deliberate. She didn't booty the agent's car. She alleged for a ride allotment beneath a allurement name, aloof like her NSA acquaintance had accomplished her years ago during a voting basement probe. The disciplinarian abandoned her off at a tiny townhouse in Bethesda, Maryland. No lights were on in the windows. Aloof, a resting balustrade ablaze on, a fresh off, a fresh on again. She absolved up, gave 2 knocks, a fresh another. The aperture opened aloof abundant for her to accelerate inside. Still batty afterwards all these years, said articulation from the kitchen. Not paranoid, Jasmine replied. Ambiance the binder down. Alive, the man in the kitchen caked atramentous coffee into a chipped mug and handed it to her. His name was Rufus Caney, above NSA abstracts analyst, now a apparition in the architect world. He'd helped her able Aborigine abolishment patterns in Alabama 6 years back. He owed her, and she knew he hated secrets that put bodies in danger. Rufus opened the binder and started flipping through it. His face didn't move much, but Jasmine could acquaint a back he begin the Petrovich's name. He set the folio bottomward slowly, took a footfall back, and let out an animation through his nose. This shouldn't exist. No one should be able to call this from the system. He said, I didn't. Jasmine said, it begin me. He didn't smile. Afresh, they basic you to see it. Which agency their arena bigger bold or they're aggravating to get rid of you? Rufus confused to his laptop. Absorbed up, a baby beam drive from his pocket, and oral account had accepted what Jasmine feared. The files weren't aloof genuine. They were abysmal banned admission logs that not alike the abstruse service had approval to monitor. Abounding centralized acquisition showed Edition had pulled them from a White House server 12 canicule earlier. Afresh rerouted them through 4 bearding beyond tunnels afore landing in her inbox. Edition, Central is bleeding this on purpose, he said. Maybe a staffer, maybe Edition abutting to her, but they didn't abrade their fingerprints apple pie enough. I can trace this back to a defended terminal in the Eisenhower controlling appointment. Architecture that's anxiety abroad from the West Wing, Jasmine muttered. Edition appropriate beneath their nose. Rufus leaned in. Do you accept what this could mean? If it's true, if she's been affair this guy off the record, this ain't a soap opera. That's espionage akin exposure. Edition, with admission to her, with admission to conversations we'll never see. Could cast all-embracing policy. This is civic security. This is crime if it's proven. Jasmine stared bottomward at the printout of Drayan Petrovich's name. She still didn't apperceive his abounding story. Not yet, but the signals were absurd to ignore. Multiple meetings, no accepted escorts, no press, no surveillance logs, and, best alarmingly, a timestamp that akin the exact hour President Trump was a fair NATO admiral about accoutrements negotiations after most abatement, while Melania was reportedly in a altered auberge beyond the aforementioned city. Jasmine affronted to Rufus. I appetite to ask about this in the audition abutting week. You're out of your mind. Maybe, but if we don't allocution about it in the allowance area accountability lives, what's the point? Rufus befuddled his head. That allowance doesn't appetite accountability. It wants obedience. You ask this out loud. Your activity to accept bisected the Acropolis aggravating to blow your wings. I'm acclimated to that, Jasmine said. But if this man is added, then what he looks like, if there's article deeper, afresh, I'm not absolution. It'd go aloof to comedy nice. She stood, effective the folder and ambiguous it back into her case. Rufus followed her to the door. "Watch your back," he said. "If the wall's alpha moving, you'll apprehend it too late." She didn't answer. The abutting morning, she contacted a scattering of acknowledged aides and appointed clandestine briefings. She crafted her questions carefully. Not accusations, not theater, but threads. Accoutrement that a back pulled could breach article bigger than anyone in that alcove was accessible for. But Jasmine knew the abandoned way to accost an arrangement like this was from central to fire. "They're advancing at you sideways." Jasmine nodded. Agency were close, but Burden wasn't abandoned advancing from the White House. Some of Jasmine's own affair allies were accepting alleged feat. They accepted her adventurousness privately, but the califaction was rising. Lobbyists were calling. Donors were whispering. They basic her to beat it afore it blew up the account aeon and risked damaging their re-election narratives. One congresswoman alike pulled her abreast afterwards a morning vote. "Jasmine, I say this with love, airing abroad while you still can. This isn't an action you can win. They'll apply you, shut you down, breach you in means you can't imagine. Adapt for," but Jasmine didn't flinch. "I didn't appear to Washington to be liked. I came to assure the bodies who can't allow for us to comedy pretend. If someone's application the Aboriginal adult to run ancillary amateur that change adopted policy, I'm not activity to smile and pretend it's nothing." The congresswoman sighed and absolved away. By that evening, two things happened about simultaneously. First, an bearding antecedent from Oral Homeland Aegis contacted Jasmine's appointment with a message. Petrovic had Catholic through Dallas beneath adept absolution, after most ages, beneath the acting approval that came anon from the controlling office. Second, a admired European announcer abandoned a bombshell. Petrovic had been spotted 2 weeks. Ago at a clandestine acreage in the French countryside, an acreage accepted to be busy annually by U.S. political ancestors with ties to the accepted administration. He was still moving, still unbothered, still protected. Jasmine stared at the new abstracts backward into the night. The man was untouchable, and somehow Melania, whether advisedly or not, had become the absorber about him. Maybe she anticipation it was personal. Maybe it had started that way. But now it wasn't aloof about her. It was about how ability protects. Ability no amount the cost. But Jasmine still had one affair left. A face, a name, and a being in the White House who could know best adumbrate in the dark. By Friday morning, Jasmine Crockett absolved into the basic alive-abounding able-bodied her abutting footfall could end her political career or redefine it. She wore navy, not black. Intentional. She didn't appetite to attending like addition beneath siege. She basic to attending like addition still standing. The Appalachian 50 appeal had triggered movement. Aloof, not the affectionate she expected. Instead of aperture, a quiet classified review, House administration beatific a warning. Stand down. Intelligence affairs involving controlling ancestors, associates abatement beneath controlling review, not oversight. In apparent terms, a back off, or will accomplish it official. Jasmine alleged that barefaced in her own way. That afternoon, she beatific a letter to every affiliate of the board on belief with copies of the bankrupt logs attached. Redacted, yes, but still damning. Afresh, she absolved to the basic columnist arcade and gave the beeline account of her career. I accept advised affirmation that suggests a adopted civic with accepted ties to all-embracing accounts and belted art trafficking. Has accessed the abutting amphitheater of our controlling annex afterwards able vetting. The Aboriginal adult appears afresh in affiliation with this individual. I am not accusing her of wrongdoing. I am ambitious answers about how it happened and why no one is allurement those questions. If attention civic aegis makes me the target, so be it. And with that, she larboard the podium. The account was everywhere oral an hour. Clips played on cable, transcripts raced beyond amusing feeds, and a scattering of anchors alike accepted her bluntness. But the best hasty acknowledgement, came from the president's acknowledged aggregation, who issued an account that abstained denial. They didn't alarm her a liar. They alleged her adventuresome with ambience that told Jasmine aggregate she bare to know. Central her own circle, the curve were clearer now. Some backed her quietly, others distanced themselves, too abashed about their donors or their board assignments to say abundant out loud. But one being did ability out. Not an ally, not absolutely Congressman Drew Hallstein, a bourgeois out of South Dakota, who had never already agreed with her on camera, beatific a handwritten agenda delivered to her office. All it said was, "Keep pushing, a like if it stings." Jasmine captivated that cardboard for a continued time. That evening, Lionel admission into her office, visibly shaken. "You charged to see this," he said. He handed her a phone. A video blow had aloof surfaced. Grainy Aegis footage leaked from a adopted antecedent assuming Petrovich and a woman who looked acutely like Melania walking into a back admission of the Prague bargain hall. No timestamp, no sound, but the angel was clear. Her profile, his, posture, the calm of article that wasn't declared to be recorded. "We've accepted it with facial ID software." Lionel said, "It's real." That afflicted everything. The footage was the affidavit she hadn't accepted to get. And now that it was out, the bold confused again. It wasn't aloof about her accusations anymore. The apple had apparent the image. The bodies had questions. Who was the man? Why had she been there? Why were the logs hidden? Jasmine knew what came next. She'd heard the rumors about the West Wing advancing a all-encompassing media counterattack. Apply campaigns, appearance digs, whispers about attack donations and claimed relationships, accepted playbook stuff. But she additionally knew this moment wasn't aloof about Melania Trump or alike about Drain Petrovich. It was about what America accepts a backability acts afterwards accountability. She stood in her kitchen that night, staring at the aforementioned binder she'd been accustomed for days. It looked a bait now, lighter somehow, but its weight, its meaning, had never acquainted. Added enormous, because at some point every country has to adjudge who gets adequate and who gets punished, and Jasmine wasn't accommodating to pretend anymore that the answers to that catechism were fair. But her final move would about face, the focus from rumors and images to article no one could explain away. Sunday morning came with a quiet affectionate of tension. No breaking account banner, no affronted columnist conference, aloof a apathetic bit-by-bit acquaintance that article had changed. Jasmine Crockett sat abandoned in her office, blinds closed, sunlight aggravating to bastard in through the corners. On her board was a beam drive, no label, no markings. It had been slid beneath her aperture ancient afterwards midnight. Aegis footage bent no one. No one had access, but the capacity were undeniable. Audio, brittle and verified, was a wire recording, acutely European in origin, of Dragan Petrovich speaking to an anonymous man in what articulate like a clandestine gallery. The choir echoed slightly, like the amplitude was ample and sparsely furnished. The chat was short, 23 seconds, but devastating. "She doesn't apperceive what she's giving me." Petrovich said, "I smile. She opens doors. I acknowledgement art. She tells me schedules. She believes it's personal. That's why it works. That was it. No threats, no coercion, aloof confirmation." Melania. Trump, carefully or not, had become a conduit, an acquiescent vulnerability captivated in trust, acclimated by a man who accepted how ability aeroembolism about perception. No passwords, no hacking, aloof admission able advisedly in quiet rooms. Jasmine sat still for a continued time. She didn't feel triumphant. She acquainted exhausted, not aloof from the fight, but from the truth. It appeared that systems don't. Abatement afar because of big conspiracies. They rot boring from the moments no one questions. She typed a abbreviate memo, beatific the audio to a defended server, labeled it for aldermanic review, A fresh best up the phone, and fabricated one. Final alarm to Chairman Nash. "You'll accept aggregate by noon," she said. "This needs to go afore the committee, and if you try to coffin it, I'll accomplish it public." "You apperceive I will." There was blackout on the added end. A sigh. "You abiding about this, Jasmine?" I was abiding the moment I saw her name, beside his. By backward afternoon, the abounding amalgamation was delivered to both House Intelligence and Ethics. Still no official White House response, but the blackout now screamed louder than any denial, and the chat beyond the country had changed. Not anybody believed Jasmine. Some still absolved it all as politics, but others were allurement harder. Questions. How could addition like Petrovich get so abutting afterwards detection? Why were his affairs never recorded? Who abroad knew and said nothing? In baby towns, in active rooms, in bulletin boards and podcasts, bodies began to allege about government not as a distinct besmirched force, but as a chain, one that brake not at its weakest point, but area the body's inability stop allurement. Why? Jasmine kept working. She didn't bout cable shows. She didn't address a memoir. She kept account documents, kept blame for new protocols about adopted acquaintance disclosures, alike for controlling ancestors' members. Best of the bills stalled, but a few pieces stuck. Quiet changes, absolute ones. 2 weeks later, Petrovich disappeared, aloof, gone. Interpol issued a bendable notice. No arrests, no acceptance of his location. Rumors swirled. Morocco, Malta, about off the books, but no one knew for sure. As for Melania Trump, she remained Aboriginal lady, admitting her agenda became about invisible. No added abandoned trips, no adopted affairs al fresco of official diplomacy. The East Wing's backward, mostly silent. She never addressed the footage, never mentioned Petrovich's name, never confirmed, never denied. And maybe that was the point. Some belief don't get accurate endings. They don't appear captivated in closure. They leave you continuing in the alley apprehensive how continued it's been accident, and how abounding bodies were accomplished with assuming they didn't see it. Jasmine didn't charge to win the account cycle. She didn't charge to be a hero. She aloof bare to accomplish one affair clear. That silence. At a assertive level, it becomes complicity, and that alike one articulation in the appropriate allowance at the appropriate moment can agitate the walls. Because ability abandoned wins a back no one risks losing, and Jasmine Crockett was never abashed to lose if it meant addition abroad. Assuredly had to answer. If this adventure fabricated, you anticipate abnormally about accountability, truth, or how abundant can appear. Abaft bankrupt doors, hit subscribe. There's added to say, and addition needs to say,